Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started on action potentials. So I had to convert this to PowerPoint because I could not write on my Google Slides. So I've been going Google since 2010. So I'm sometimes slow with this a little bit. So I am going to go ahead and go over action potentials. This could actually help you if you are in AP Psych. Might be a little bit of a review. So wouldn't that be nice? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and get started. A neuron at rest. All right, so the resting membrane potential. All right, the cytoplasmic side, which the cytoplasmic side, I'm going to use red. This is your cytoplasmic side right here. That's the inside of the cell. That's more negatively charged relative to the outside of the cell. And basically, that's because of generally the sodium-potassium pump. So you can see that there is always going to be a 3 sodium to 2 potassium. That is highly influential on making the cytoplasm side being more of a negative, and the extracellular side or the outside of the cell being more positive. That's because you can see that there are 3 sodiums here and there's 2 potassium. Okay, so there's just going to be more positive ions on the outside of the cell compared to the positive ions on the inside of the cell. So normally resting potential inside is more negative, outside's more positive. All right, and so this is what is meant by a polarized membrane. All right, when this gets changed, this is how electrical messages get sent. All right, so going over the terminology for membrane potentials. All right, so all of this is relative to the resting membrane potential. All right, so there are the words that are depolarization and hyperpolarization. So depolarization is going to decrease the membrane potential. All right, so remember the inside is less negative. All right, so when depolarization occurs, okay, it becomes less negative. So what you're going to see is here's the resting potential at negative 70 millivolts. All right, so when it depolarizes, this increases the chance of producing a nerve impulse. All right, so this is going to lead towards, the inside becoming less negative, okay, which we have up here. Or becoming more positive is another way to say it. So you can see right here, this curve, if this is negative 70, it's going, to maybe negative 65 right there. So it's going towards 0. So when it depolarizes, it's going to become more positive or less negative. Now, if it's hyperpolarizing, that's going to increase the membrane potential. All right, so look, here's your resting potential, again at negative 70, and it's becoming more negative, maybe negative 75 or something like there, you could say. It's becoming more negative. All right, when this happens, there's less of a chance to producing a nerve impulse. Depolarization increases the chance of producing a nerve impulse, and this is going to be sending a message from neuron to neuron, right, to respond. So from the last video, hey, I smell some cookies, that's integration, sensory receptors, sending that message to the brain, the integration center, or from the brain, hey, I'm going to go pick up those cookies and put them in my mouth, to those effector cells. So these impulses get sent when there's depolarization. When it's hyperpolarization, that reduces the chance of a nerve impulse. So these are just some notes. And this is how action potentials are sent. And so we'll look at these in a graph in a second. I just want to go over. All right, so resting state, there are these different channels. There's gated ones, and then there's leaky channels. Okay, the gated ones, something has to open the gate or close the gate. There has to be a signal. Leaky channels, those are easily where ions can pass through and just leak through. All right, and so then there's a resting potential. So you saw that that was -70. Okay, when it's at that, nothing's happening. The inside is more negative to the outside. So if it's at its resting state, what can happen is it can happen that it can depolarize. And remember, depolarization becomes more positive. And as you see here, it decreases in the membrane potential, so there's more positive. So what happens is those channels that are gated, they open, and then sodium ions can go into the cell. Repolarization, all right, so remember the pump that was highly influential is that sodium-potassium pump, all right? So repolarization is going to be when the membrane is permeable, the membrane that was permeable to the sodium ions that were entering over here, all right, it declines, all right? So sodium is coming in, and it's 3 of those, all right? But then it's not permeable anymore, all right? But then what becomes permeable is the potassium. So basically, these gates here, the sodium gates, are going to close, and the potassium channels open. And there's going to be 2 of those potassium ions that then leave the cell. All right, so then this is going to bring back the membrane potential back to resting, which was over here. Now, basically, there's this hyperpolarization, which we saw in the graph before. And if this was resting, it means it went below resting, right? So the potassium channels are going to stay open. What happens is there's a delay. Potassium stays open, so you get this dip that you see here. And basically, that happens, and that makes the resting potential more negative because there's that dip. And another signal cannot be fired until it comes back up. If this is your -70, it needs to, this is going to be like 75, 80, -80 has to get back to here. And then another action potential can fire. All right, so I don't know if this is going to work. So you guys are going to have to, let's see if this works. Okay, don't know what that is. So you guys, I put this in PowerPoint, so it probably messed up my animation. So I want you to watch that so you can see what's going on in the action potential, but you can see that as an action potential moves, what happens to, what looks like is going to happen here is looks like sodiums were moving in. All right, potassiums are moving out, okay, because you can see all those potassiums that have moved out. And then this right here, this is going to be your sodium potassium pump. And this is going to bring it back to the resting potential. Now, if I go back, you know, I was telling you it's 3 sodiums to 2. I don't want you to focus on that too much right now, but that's how it works. And I want to show you in this, this right here, Why it's 3-2? This is the sodium potassium pump. Here's the 3 sodiums, and look at their shape. And then here's the 2 potassiums. Please watch this so that you can understand how this works. And you should be able to pay attention to what happens. See, this is negative, negative, and then this is positive, positive. So this is going to be how the action potential, which is my AP, is propagating along the neuron. And that's going to be along the axon of the neuron. All right, this is the slide that you should fill out in your packet, and this is what you should make sure that you understand. And so remember, there are channels, there are just the leaky channels, and there are the gated. All right, so remember here, these are the voltage gated ones. So here we start off at your resting potential. So notice it's around that negative 70. These should be negatives here. All right, and so the negative 70 millivolts, all right, nothing is happening here. All right, but then as the sodium is coming in, and I'm just going to write it like this, sodium is coming in, this number 2 is your depolarization. So is caused by sodium flowing into the cell. All right, so sodium's flooding in. Remember, the membrane is permeable to sodium ions, and so this is depolarization. This is your action potential. All right, so this part here. All right, so sodium goes in, and then those gates close, and the membrane does not depolarize anymore. So now it repolarizes by potassium is going out. Potassium's going out, potassium's going out. So over here, potassium going in, remember, that's making it more positive. So it was at negative 70. And basically, you can see the threshold here. It's something known as the all or none phenomena. So as when sodium ions come in, all right, and they reach that negative 55, that's known as the all or none phenomenon. If it hits here, okay, it's going to fire. So here it's firing, and this is going to start, sending that action potential. And then you can see, so it's becoming more positive. Well, then some of the positive ions are going out, and this is the repolarization. And so you can see this happens, and now it's becoming even more negative because we're more negative here. And that's because the gates are delayed and they take longer to shut. Now, another one of these action potentials, a spike, and this is like what we see in an EKG, right? So another one of them cannot fire until like number 1, it reaches number 1 here. And how is that going to happen? Well, that's where that sodium potassium pump comes in. And that's going to bring those ions back and forth to establish the resting potential. Remember, this is your resting. Sorry about my handwriting. All right, but that's what goes on in an action potential. So how do we interpret a stimulus and the speed of the message? All action potentials are alike, okay, regardless of the stimulus intensity. All right, so how can the central nervous system, remember your brain and your spinal cord, tell a strong stimulus from a weak one? All right, so a strong one from a weak one. All right, so if it's strong, there's going to be more frequent action potentials. Remember, this is your action potential here. The conduction velocity, all right, so the speed, okay, of the action potentials are going to depend on the diameter of the axon, Okay, if they're larger, there's less resistance. All right, and myelination. Remember the Schwann cells, all right, the myelin sheaths, and remember those nodes of Ranvier in your peripheral nervous system, and remember the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. Keep in mind that an action potential cannot be fired. So let's do my bad drawing here. I'm going to skip this one. An action potential, there, that's better, cannot be generated. I should say a second one cannot be generated until it gets back to the resting. This is the resting. So when it's down here, an action potential cannot be fired. So now that it's here, there can be another action potential. So this is an action potential. And this is an action potential. When it is here, this is your hyperpolarization, right? It is 2 negative, okay? So we said a strong stimulus, there's more frequent action potential, so that means it's able to reestablish its resting potential faster. So the conduction velocity depends on, again, the axon diameter and the myelination.